All right, I have 9:50. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for taking that break and getting what you need to kind of for yourself for this morning to continue on with us. Um, our second presentation today is planning resources for wellness with Dr. Scoville. Dr. Scoville is a professor in the School of Health Science and Wellness, College of Professional Studies at the University of Wisconsin Stevens Point. Sally also oversees the Employee Wellness Program at UW Stevens Point, which was awarded a bronze level award from the Governor's Worksite Wellness Program. Her field of study includes worksite health promotion programs and designing effective interventions for community and corporate clients. She has published articles about developing experiential learning programs for students. Sally is also a faculty member for the National Wellness Institute's two certificate programs in worksite wellness and is a board member for the Wellness Council of Wisconsin. She serves as a peer reviewer for the Building Healthy Academic Communities Journal, along with reviewing grants and research for other organizations. Sally has been working in the field of wellness for 33 years in a variety of roles prior to coming to UWSP. She is Yoga Alliance certified instructor, completed training in resilience from the organization Wellness and Learning Systems, certified as a mental health first aid instructor, Make It Okay ambassador, is completing the QPR Institute instructor certification, studied mindfulness through the Penn Resilience Program, and utilizes the VIA character strengths to assist students grow more resilient using their unique character strengths. I don't know how she has time to do all this stuff, but okay. And I'm very, very jealous. Sally presents and consults with other organizations nationally and has presented internationally as well. Welcome back, Dr. Scoville. We're excited to have you back this week.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. It's funny to hear all that read, and it's just almost embarrassing at times. But it also, when I listen to it, just like everybody being here today and they're learning, it reminds me that I like to be a continuous learner. And so that's why I'm always learning new things, especially about particular areas of interest. So I hope that all of you today will take that same approach and think about being a continual learner today, as we've talked about over the last 2 weeks, several pieces here. Today I'm going to talk a little bit more in a practical manner about how to think about addressing wellness in your staff. I know we talked about communications last week. You've had other presentations on stress. So we're going to do a little bit about how can you start to help your staff make plans for their well-being and give you some free resources that are out there that you can use organizationally, but then also you can make some referrals to your staff. So let's get started. So just some objectives. Last year, I don't know how many of you were here last year because I can't see everybody and remember all those names from a year ago, but I did a really brief overview of the 7 dimensions of wellness and talked about how we can look at wellness. So I want to give you a brief overview again about what wellness is. Then also talk about how we can start to use, as leaders, we can start being coaches for our employees to look at their own wellness or their own well-being, and we'll talk about that shift. And then show you some toolkits that you can download. I've sent this presentation. It's got all the links in it that can be sent out, so you can click on the links when you get it. And then also about how do you work with different staff members. And I know you've talked about multi-generational issues also, so I think that's really important to keep in mind here. So as we know, this is a recent report from the U.S. Surgeon General, who just published in October of last year, called the Framework for Mental Health at Work, Workplace Mental Health Framework. And one of the profound statements that really hit me when I have been really studying this report is how much workplaces play this significant role in our lives, and that workplaces also, and what we do at work, affects our physical and mental well-being. Pros and cons of both of those, but that having that purpose, having a sense of fulfillment in our work is so important to us. And if we don't have that, we're also going to look at some information on that here in a bit. So just to give you a brief review, in 1978, so it's a really long time ago, the National Wellness Institute, which was made up of people from UW-Stevens Point and other experts in the field, came up with the idea of wellness, and they called it the 6 dimensions of wellness. Well, at Stevens Point, they took that a step further and they developed in around 1980, just a couple years later, a little expansion on that. And they talked about the seven dimensions of wellness, which we looked at last year. But they also came up with this definition where wellness isn't something that we ever fully achieve, but it's conscious, self-directed, and evolving. We get to direct our own wellness in the different ways where we find that we have strengths and other ways that we think we need to have more support. It's also multidimensional. The challenge with wellness, even at our own university, when I did a survey several years ago, is that when people think of wellness, they think of diet and exercise. Maybe they think of stress or self-care, but it's so much broader than that. It's holistic. So we have to think about all the dimensions and that our staff are coming to us with all those different dimensions that help keep them well. But we should always think of wellness as positive and affirming instead of what's wrong with us. Having been in wellness for 30, I don't know, 33 years maybe. We used to be about all telling people all what's wrong with them, thinking that that was going to help them be motivated to get well. And we know that that is not true because people aren't getting any better. So wellness really needs to be positive and affirming, and that's what I want to talk about today when I talk about leadership process of coaching your employees to help them be well. So also think about that we're always evolving, it's active, and that people make choices. And sometimes we don't always make the best choices, but how can we help those around us make better choices? The interesting thing is that there's been a shift, and to me they're very similar terms, but there's been a shift to calling wellness more well-being. Well-being, according to Gallup, who did the researchers from Gallup are the ones who did the study, and they've actually published a book probably maybe 10 to 15 years ago called The Elements of Well-Being, and now they've published another book called Well-Being at Work. But they say they have five dimensions, that it's all about individuals' experiences, perception of what's important, how somebody's life is going. So again, it looks at different dimensions, but maybe in a little bit of a shift. And I think when people hear the word well-being, like I'm concerned for your well-being, they don't necessarily immediately think of diet and exercise. When you say I'm concerned with your wellness, you know, as a wellness person all these years, people think I'm the food police or the smoking police or, oh, I'm smoking, oh, I'm eating a piece of cake. Well, we don't want to have that negativity associated. So I think the shift to well-being might be a way to put a more positive spin on it. This is Gallup's Elements of Well-Being: social, financial, physical, community, career. They're very similar to our seven dimensions in a lot of ways. We call ours occupational, but career, you like what you do. Social, do you have those relationships? Finances, you manage your money well. Physical, energy to get things done. That doesn't just mean what we're eating and what we're doing, that we have that physical energy every day, that we can optimize our well-being and whatever's going on around us. And then also the community where you like where you live. We were just talking about that, if any of you were on earlier, that I moved up here 16 years ago from Nashville, which everybody thinks is the best place to live in the world, and it's my hometown. But it's not the town I grew up in. It's too busy, it's too crowded, there's too much going on, too much traffic, and it's too hot in the summer. So again, I probably wouldn't be thriving there anymore. I like living up here. Yesterday's spring day was amazing. Sunny with a little bit of snow, warm breezes. I was happy. So do you like where you live? And if you don't, can you make the most out of it? One of the interesting things about this is when Gallup did this study, they found that career well-being, which is why we're here today, was really kind of the foundation to supporting all the others when we look at employee well-being. That if we aren't happy in our careers, that it tends to affect everything else. That it affects the way that we take care of ourselves. It affects our relationships. It definitely affects our money. Some people stay in a career just because they feel like they're making money, and it's really sad to me when I see people who stay there just for the money when they're so unhappy in what they're doing and they feel stuck. So again, career well-being is really that foundation for everything else. When Gallup actually started studying these elements of well-being, they actually looked at classifying people as they were in each of these elements, and they classify them as thriving, struggling, suffering. Striving is when people feel like their well-being is strong, they have a positive view on life. They actually show that they report fewer health problems and sick days. So if we feel like we're thriving in our life, then we're going to be healthier and we're going to show up at work with more energy, enjoyment. The next category is struggling. So well-being is more moderate or inconsistent. And so people don't have as good an outlook on their life, but it comes and goes. So they feel like they're going to struggle, or maybe they see future challenges where they might struggle. They also say they have more daily stress, they're worried about their finances. And the interesting thing is that people who are struggling have more than double the sick days of those who are thriving. So you can see some of the other health risks that they have. When we get down to the lower category, we have the suffering, where people's well-being is really at risk. They don't feel happy about their lives. They give their lives very poor ratings. When you ask them about the view of their next 5 years, they have very negative views. And we would really like to help people move away from this category and at least move up to one of the other categories. A lot of people who are in this suffering are saying that some of their basic physiological needs aren't even being met. So at the bottom, maybe their food, shelter, they might have more physical pain, but they also tend to have more mental health issues. They also tend to not take care of their health or have lower access to health care. So we want to really think about how do we move our people. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of breakdown of some information. Gallup has so much data and statistics. I really didn't want to get into that because I think it's more important for us to think about what are the stories of the people who are in these categories. You know, where do you feel like you are in the suffering, struggling, thriving? What about those people that you're serving? What about the people that are working for you? Where are they in these categories? And we have to approach everybody again right where they're at. So my question to you is, how do we help people thrive? How do we move them up from suffering or struggling to thriving? How do we move them up into that thriving category? And it's not from that old view of wellness of here's what's wrong with you. You need to quit smoking and lose weight and eat healthy and do mindful meditation every day. And, some of these are just not realistic to everybody. So how can we support others to thrive? So what I want to challenge all of you, because you are going to be you're the wellness leaders, the well-being leaders, you're also the leaders in the after school network, is to think about moving from that manager mindset, from being a boss, even though you are, to being more of a coach. How do we help develop employee performance and have regular coaching conversations to provide meaningful feedback? Last week, I think this ties in really well to what I talked about last week with communication and having those meaningful conversations with employees and some steps to do that from a number of sources. So then how do we start to do it though? I thought this was really interesting from the Harvard Business Review that you would think would be more hardcore business, but this statement when I was reading this article really hit me. And I think this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to connect with people. We want to inspire them to be their best and help them to grow. Now, I work with students all the time, and this is kind of my mantra, is connecting with those students, inspiring them to do better and helping them grow, to be successful when they leave our university. But also, how can we challenge people to come up with answers that they require? So that's what wellness has really started to morph into. Instead of telling people what's wrong with them or here's how to fix it, how do we help them through coaching to come up with their own answers? Any questions or comments about that before we move on? As I said earlier, I love feedback or questions or comments that you've had when you've maybe used a coaching model to help employees improve. So this is from some business models, and I used this in a leadership training uh, about a year ago that looks at the way that we move from coaching others to being a leader through coaching, but leading through telling. And if you're familiar with business principles, the old way was called transactional leadership through a transformational leadership. Transactional leadership emphasizes, structure, organization, supervision, performance, and outcomes. That is still important that we have to do that. But then how do we move from just doing that to transformation where we want to empower others develop and building those relationships. Transactional is more that old school leadership, where you need to get things done. Also, what's the difference between manager and leader? We have to morph between those. When I work with others, how do I manage performance, but I also have to lead them to be motivated to change. And sometimes that's a harder role to do. When we look at transactional leadership, we focus on supervision, organization, group performance, but it's really good, especially if we're focusing on tasks and processes. That is a really good time to look at using transactional leadership. The other thing we know is utilizing rewards and punishments. You get a reward if you do the right thing, or you're punished if you don't. And maybe not punished in the physical sense, but docked pay, missed days from work, written up, something like that. But it's also transactional leadership is a great time, especially in times of crisis when goals are clear cut, focus is needed, in athletics. You're trying to inspire them, but when there's a play to be made, the coach has got to tell them which play needs to be made. They have the final call. Also, I'll give you an example. If you're in the middle of a medical emergency and somebody's having a heart attack, somebody needs to take charge to tell other people what to do. That's a great place. So that's maybe more extreme, but we can think of situations like that. So what are some situations, so put this in the chat, what are some situations in your work where transactional leadership is 100% important for us to think about? I don't know if anybody's putting anything in the chat.
Nothing yet.
Okay.
Does anybody have do you have a good example to kind of get them started?
Like I said, in athletics, when it's somebody who needs to call that final play, or there needs to be
Mm,
somebody in charge that has to look at that. When you're looking at being a manager, if there's a process that needs to be implemented, then you'd want to be the manager. How do we get that implemented? What are the outcomes? How do we get people to do that? I worked in a factory at one time. We were putting in new machines to, it's kind of hard to, that were stuffing insulation into bats that then get shipped out to consumers. And so the manager had to be there to train everybody step by step on the process. But as a leader, that person then had to step back once they had the training to say, now I've trained them as best I can. How can I let them use that process? So they had to move from manager to leader in that type of process. Get it going, train everybody, make sure it's being done right, and then as a leader, not micromanaging them to utilize the new system.
mhm. Yeah, we have some things in the chat now. We in our health center, high risk situations, weather related, needing to get the kids and staff indoors quickly, are some of the examples that are put in the chat.
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of places, so I'm not saying transactional leadership is bad. There's a place for it. But and what I'm talking about today is we're trying to empower our staff to be better, to be well. Sometimes that goes beyond just transactional leadership of just doing the job. It's how do we get them to be engaged in their job, to feel like they have purpose? And I think that's where we can move into the transformational leadership. One of the big things in transformational leadership is recognition of employee successes. And I did not do it. I sat through a training on psychological safety at the workplace. And one of the things that the presenter said is that when people never feel like they get recognized for what they're doing and that somebody else takes the credit for it, that does not create a psychologically safe workplace. And when you want to create that safety and you want to empower and motivate people, that recognition. That doesn't just mean always praising, but if somebody has come up with something new or they've made some big steps, we want to be able to recognize them. We also want to look at creative problem solving to promote better care, positive work. Ability to influence others to go above and beyond what's expected for the greater good of the organization. You've all probably heard of quiet quitting, where people are they're just doing what they barely have to do for their job. They're not doing extra. And they're saying, I'm tired of doing extra and not getting recognized for it. So we know often in our organizations, we need to get people to actually take initiative and do more. So one, we want to recognize them for that, but how can we influence them to want to take that next step and not just be the quiet quitters that are sitting there or the people that are just doing the bare minimum? The other piece I want to challenge everybody to is to build trust. That was also part of the communication talk that I did a couple weeks ago. To me, that's walking the talk. That we don't have to be the marathon runner who eats perfect, that meditates every day, but to build trust in what we're asking others to do, we have to say, I'm trying this too. We can always fall short. We know we do. I do. But also build trust. We have to walk our talk. We have to be that role model. Communication is really key. Every time I looked at anything, we talk about communication. We also want to be proactive, where we recognize employees, where we give them more job skills when they're ready for it. But we can also focus not just on their professional growth, but also what are their personal goals. I had a mentor that did this really well. Would you like to do beyond just improve your skills on your job? Where do you want to go personally? And leaders also should focus on that for themselves too. You should focus on building your professional and your personal goals. So when we're looking at this coaching piece, I want to just give you some questions that you can think about asking to your employees so you can actually, when you sit down with them and you're talking about their well-being, you can use this in any situation, but specifically about their well-being, you can ask them these questions about challenges and opportunities they might be feeling about achieving some higher level of well-being in any of those elements. How do you feel about your current situation? Or that's the same thing, very similar to what Gallup asks when they ask people if they're thriving to struggling, is how do you feel in these areas? Because our perception in well-being is more important than what our biometric screening tells us. That people who perceive their health and their well-being as better have better outcomes even if they have poor health than people who have a poor health perception. So how do you feel? What is working? What is not working? So for example, what are you doing now in this area? So instead of us telling them how to eat calories and how to go out and exercise, which is what we did in wellness, ask them what's working and what's not. Have they taken any actions? And if you were going to be successful in this area or areas that you want to improve in, what does that look like to you? To me, that's a really inspiring way to get to people. And we talked about transformational leadership. What does success look like to you? And it's not, maybe it is somebody wants to get that weight off to get into a wedding dress for summer, or they want to get that could be motivational for them, but it may not be. What does success look like? Also, if people are wanting to now move into their solutions, these are the next set of questions. So as you're coaching them, what do you think you should do next? So you can see how this is always empowering the person you're speaking with because you're asking them for their feedback. You're just coaching them through this. What solutions do you see? Are there other approaches that might work? And how can I support you? That, to me, that's a crucial question to ask right there. How can I support you in moving forward towards these goals? And to me, well-being is a professional and a personal goal. I worked for an organization at one time that they actually had their managers set well-being goals that were figured in part of their overall job evaluation at the end, how well these people set their own personal goals, and they got well-being incentives based on how well they met the goals that they set. So it was really kind of an interesting approach to changing well-being. And I'm not going to read all these on the right-hand side, but I just want to point out that we as leaders, our behaviors can always explain the majority of employees' workplace engagement, how we move from that manager-leader category, how well we coach our employees. And you can see on the right, this is from a lot of research that's been done out there about leadership behaviors and how employees are engaged in their work. And if we focus on employee strength, Rath and Kochi are two of the Gallup researchers, they say when we start to focus on those positives, the strengths of the employee, that engagement can increase. But it decreases when we don't focus on their strengths. So how do we do that? So again, a lot of data out there that shows that we as leaders really need to focus on how do we build up our employees and coach them into more well-being. Any questions or comments about behaviors of leaders? Maybe even things that you have tried as a leader to motivate your employees to higher levels of well-being?
Not seen anything in the chat so far. But this thing, to me, this comes up with the strong leadership and engagement, and it has to do with the leader's behavior. So I guess one of my questions would be is if you're like, oh no, everything is fine, but my employees are just like, do you have a good suggestion for either yourself being like, oh no, I don't understand why my staff are like this, where you have to like, you need to look into yourself, or like maybe your potential boss manager not understanding, like what's a good way to get them to understand that their behavior is kind of leading to this poor wellness?
Well, when I've presented to leaders, I always bring up the information about that's really, there's so much research out there that just shows how important leadership attitude is towards engagement, to creating that psychologically safe workplace, to also inspiring and motivating leaders. That I bring that up. And some leaders really like data, but then you could also, if you have them, talk about the power of stories. Sometimes stories, some leaders really like data, if they're the CFO or maybe the chief operating officer who looks at numbers and data a lot. But sometimes the human resource person could be the CEO who maybe likes a mixture of both. Sometimes a mixture of both. If you have stories of people that have changed or organizations similar to them that have changed, often that persuades people. Um, I'm doing a training for a company right now that all their leaders went through the training first to look at well-being, mental health, those types of things. And it was very helpful to tell the employees next that your leadership is committed to this. And they went through the training first so they could understand it. So then as you go through it, they can be there to support you. And that's a story that can be shared, my story to you, that this group, the leaders all went through it because when we asked why you wanted to do it, they all said they wanted to support their team and learn how to support their team better. And so the data is so clear that leadership support has a lot to do with employees feeling empowered and engaged at work. I don't know if that answers your question, but
Absolutely. My first thought when you said that is to when we're doing day camp training, and if we have like an administrative day camp staff or overnight camp or whatever, making sure that you really do carve out that time because you're doing that training beforehand, and then hopefully moving into working with the variety of staff that are coming in for that summer or whatever, but making that part really intentional. And I think if you're running year round, like how do you circle back a couple of times throughout the year to make sure that you're still on track with being being engaged in this process, to make sure that your employees are, seeing that your behavior is changing and that you're committed to it. So that's what I thought of immediately when you said that. So thank you for answering my question.
yeah, and I'm going to talk about, we talked about one of the things that was in the objectives is action planning for your employees, but I would challenge leaders to do an action plan for themselves. Where do you find that you could use more support as far as things that you can do to move more into that empowering? So making that action plan for your own well-being. Is it career well-being where you need to find more support to being more of that transformational leader? There's so many wonderful leadership trainings out there that, I don't even have one that I would recommend, but there's really good ones out there. But how can you create your own action plan? So can you circle back with yourself first and say, where am I meeting these goals? You can also ask for accountability for somebody that you report to, if they're supportive of that. I just happen to have a mentor that was supportive of that, and we would come back to my goals every so often, my personal and my professional goals. How are you doing on these? Where are you meeting? Where do you need support? What do you need to do? If you're not meeting those, do we need to sit, and then we would meet on my goals like you may not have this time with your staff, but we met more regularly, but we talked about my goals like once a quarter. So can you set time for yourself to go through them, maybe go through them with a mentor. It doesn't even have to be your own supervisor, but your own mentor. And then can you do the same thing for your staff? That's a really good question. Thank you. So as we start to look at planning and helping our staff plan for wellness or well-being, whichever you choose to call it, you'll find it's very interchangeable sometimes in our field, is how do you start to support the individual self-determination? And the questions that I gave you earlier, to me, really support these three areas. If you look at the self-determination theory, which you may have had years ago, but we're not talking about theories, but that whole part of the person gets to make their own choice, that what is their autonomy? Those questions I gave you to ask when you're sitting down with somebody is, what are they interested in pursuing? Where do they need help? And asking them, where would you like to start? So sometimes you don't even have to go through those other questions, but you can just break them down into a simple one. It also has to be related to something of their personal and professional goals that I just talked about. And active listening is sometimes really hard. We're so busy multitasking, and can't see everybody. Some of you might be multitasking right now. I have to admit that I've been on Zoom calls and I've multitasked too. But I learn more if I'll actively listen, take notes. But if you're listening to somebody else, don't multitask. Try to maintain as much eye contact and focused attention on what they're saying. And if it's not clear, in active listening, you also repeat back to them. You've probably learned all this before and are probably better at it than I am, but what I heard you say is that correct? Also, how do you help them be competent? As we know, as we're hiring new staff, that when they first come in, they don't have and they may not have mastery of all our tasks. It's the same thing when you're looking at well-being. They might not understand all the tasks they need to do to help with their well-being. That's where we can help them develop some steps. How do we help them learn different skills? And as we empower other people, it really helps them be more intrinsically driven rather than extrinsically driven for a reward. Like we get $150 at UW Stevens Point by doing an HRA, a biometric screening, and a well-being activity, but I don't think it gets people engaged. Only 39% of the people did it last year. Yeah, we get our $150, but did people change? Not really. So how do we get people to be intrinsically motivated to make the changes of where they want to make it? And I think the empathy that it's going to be a struggle, it's going to be hard, what their feelings are, and then help them determine the skills. The other thing I want to say is always make wellness fun. I start my classes every day with a positive thing or something good that happened to you. I don't know if you have an ability to start a work day, but sometimes just give everybody to give a word. What are you grateful for? So for you guys, I should have started my presentation that way. So if you haven't thought about it today, put something in the chat that you're grateful for today. My very first thing was yesterday was a beautiful spring day, and I went for a very long trail ride on one of my new horses that I'm training, and it was wonderful. He went further than he's ever gone, and it was a beautiful day, and I got sunburned. That was the very first thing on my gratitude list. So put something out here. Can we do that for our staff? What are you grateful for? What's something positive? I'm seeing stuff appearing. I can't read them all, but I think it's awesome that you guys are thinking about. Can we do that for others? Can we make it fun? Can we be a little silly about it? Also focus on the whole person. We talked about wellness being holistic, moving away from just that physical element of well-being. Some of that might be important. It might be self-care. One of my goals this year was to floss my teeth more regularly. I mean, that sounds really silly, but I don't floss every day. I'm terrible, but at least once a week can I get myself to floss, which was a big change from rarely flossing at all to once a week, and I'm doing very well with it. So again, I made it more achievable. I knew I wouldn't achieve every day. So again, that sounds really silly, but that's really simple for me to do. And it gives me control, and I start to think about other areas. Also, when you meet with staff, it gives an opportunity for you both to slow down, but can you actually provide opportunities in the work site where people can slow down? Maybe they can do mindfulness, journaling, gratitude. I just asked you all to do a gratitude. I've seen some things popped up. Is any interesting gratitudes there that are coming up?
Oh yeah, sunshine, good weather, and spring break. A warm cup of coffee. And I put new birds in the yard. I'm very excited to see who's making their way through my yard as they're moving up north. So yeah. Oh, and then somebody else has said guilty on the multitasking. Yeah.
Well, thanks for admitting it. We know people do. Yes, I mean, these are really simple steps that you can start to take. And in this, I'm not going to click on all of these because I had not planned on it, but I've sent my presentation to Rachel's got it, and I'm sure she'll be everybody will be sharing the presentations. If you click on each of these are toolkits that are free that we can look at. So for an individual, if they have a area they want to work on, the NIH has a wonderful list of toolkits in every different dimension of wellness and well-being. They even have a specific one for emotional wellness. So you can look at these, and if there's a person that's working on a particular area, you can refer them to using these toolkits that they could do. If you're looking at building something for your work site, some steps you can do, and the state of Wisconsin has a great one. They actually have resources at the end, along with an action plan that you can use for your work site, that you can then build a wellness plan for your whole work site. But they also have links to other agencies that provide, excuse me, free resources. Maybe you want to do a fun employee challenge, or you want to do a walking challenge, or a drink more water challenge, or we had a kindness challenge through our wellness program. Here's some links here about how to create challenges, and this other company called Wellable, they actually share a lot of their free challenges. Action plans, there's some sample plans, there's a self-care wheel that people can assess their wellness there and look at creating a plan. And then also, how do we tailor our programs for diversity, equity, inclusion? So Wellwright has an article here about how do we look at inclusivity with our wellness and well-being, and then how do we tailor our well-being for different groups of people. So again, I'm not going to go into it, but I did want to provide you resources that later you can feel free to go explore because they're all free. And then as we wrap up here, I want to get back to that coaching piece. You've got a lot of resources here, a lot of steps, questions you can ask. There's not a one formula, but it's really empowering the other person to develop their own plans once they identify what they want to work on. When you coach as a leader, you don't need to be the expert. I think that's what we've all seen. We're not the smartest. You don't have to have the solutions, but the connection, the inspiration, and helping them search and discover their own answers to me is that transformational leader, and also that leader as a coach. And that's a lot where business is moving now, is being that leader coach. And that's all I have, unless somebody has some questions or comments.
Well, thank you so much, Sally. That was Dr. Scoville, excuse me.
Oh, just call me
Thank you
Sally.
so much. Yeah, so we don't have any questions so far in the chat, but let's open it up right now to talk a little bit more about what questions or thoughts you have for Sally while we have her. I mean, those resources, I'm very excited to just click on everything, especially the free, and you can look at them. So yeah, throw some things in the chat or come off of mute if that's okay, to ask some questions or add something to some of the amazing comments you talked about.
Yeah, and if anybody wants to, because we do have time for questions and answers, I just didn't want to do it so I could stay within the time frame some of you needed to be in. I'm happy to open that back up and go back to that resource list and open some of those up if you want to have questions about those. So I'll throw out a question to everybody on here. What is one thing that you can take from what I've talked about today that you can start to do with your staff once they're hired, and or the ones who are already there? What's one thing you can start doing? You can unmute or chat. Yep, ask them their personal goals before camp. Absolutely. And get them to write them down.
Are any of those the wellness programs that you shared? Going back to Paula's question here about personal goals and writing them down and doing pre-camp, are these any of those that you can set up like ahead of time before you do your staff training, that you could have them work on ahead of time so they're prepped for when you want to start staff training?
Let me go back to this. I'm guessing you see my presentation. This self-care wheel right here, I'll click on it and we'll see. Can anybody see that, or do I have to do a different share?
I think it's a different share, Sally.
Okay. It says I'm sharing my PowerPoint. I apologize, I'm not as
Yeah,
familiar with WebEx. I'm trying to find a way I can share.
yeah, the PowerPoint we see, but we're seeing the wellness toolkits, not a different wheel.
Okay, let me try sharing just my screen. There we go. This is a self-care wheel with activities. Hopefully you can see that now. And it's got worksheets
Yep, we
that
can see.
says now download free self-compassion tools. There's so many freebies out there. So again, when you go through this, what is the self-care wheel? It gives you some templates, worksheets, and PDFs. So when you scroll down, these are things that you can do for self-care. So you've got a way that you can click on any of these and use these. So there's a lot of links in here that you can download and look at. You could have them do this self-care wheel. You can have them develop some activities. There's templates, worksheets, and PDFs. So there's a lot of information that you can explore ahead of time. I like the self-care wheel. We've done that with a wellness wheel. I think what I gave you last year, we actually used our 7 dimensions of wellness with the 7 on it, and I had little bullets beside it where people could look at where they are in each of those dimensions and write something they'd like to do in each of those dimensions and improve on. So what we did last year, if anybody remembers the presentation I did, I had the 7-dimensional wellness form sit out that had the 7 and the lines on it for you guys to use during the presentation. And if you're interested in that, I can send it out again, or send it to Rachel, Kathy, to whoever sends everything out, Kelly, if you want to use that simple 7-dimension wheel and send it out and say, where are you with these dimensions?
I'm curious if anybody did that from last summer, um, or have done something similar and how that went for them. I think thinking about like giving them the wellness wheel and working on it, but then the follow through, or like were your was your team just not excited about it, or they were like, this was amazing. Love to hear if anybody used that from last year.
I think sometimes sitting down, if you're going to sit down with people one-on-one, it works really well there also, or one of these self-care wheels works well there.
Yeah, and I think Kelly, to your original question, it's like trying to do it before pre-camp, I think is a great idea to send that out to staff ahead of time. And then you can build some of your staff training around that conversation, either independently or with a full group of both.
And even I would say, even before they're hired, maybe previewing it with them that this is something that we do in our staff training. And this is how we kind of work on, like, we are focused on your wellness through, or your well-being, excuse me, your well-being, because we know that, this is a part of our life and our process and where we're moving along. So this is what we do in training, and this is how we go through. So I think being transparent and clear about that we are concerned about our staff's well-being, because if we're not, I mean, we just talked about stress and how things with days off and things like that. But yeah, so I'd say encourage you to do that, even if that's a possibility.
Yeah, and I think the questions that I shared on one of the slides of how you can coach people through some of the questions. If you're going to do a bigger group training, you could talk about the elements of well-being or wellness, and then ask them to rate where they are, and then also ask them those coaching questions. You can do it as a group also. So using any of those questions that I provided to you to coach them through that. I think that's really important to move towards that, empowering them and asking them questions to fill it out. And if you'd like, I can look that up. I'm not sure where I saved it, but I'm more than happy to send that over again.
So we could put it in the chat, even if it's after this session, so people can have access to it as well.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think we do have a comment that says, I've used this on a small team and large seasonal staff team setting. It worked better with post-college staff, I feel, as college students often go through exercises and are not always the most focused on their well-being by large.
So you could always raise your hand, but who did not take care of their well-being during college very well? That would be me. I was not a wellness, health, physical education person when I went through college. There wasn't such a thing. But I changed careers after I changed my own well-being. I see somebody says, somebody didn't do it even though they were a health and promotion and wellness major. Thank you for admitting that. I like the way you talk about that one-on-one. I think that's a great way to use it. I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you all who keep sharing. Yeah, it is a great development piece. Like I said, my supervisor, he's still my mentor. I still talk to him a couple times a year now. But we would sit down and talk about what was I going through personally, professionally, what were my goals, what did I need to do to achieve those. It's probably why we still talk now 16 plus years later. Anyone else have questions or something you'd like for me to go back and go over? I really wanted to provide you the tools instead of just telling you what to use and let you explore them also.
I'm not seeing any right now.
Okay, well, I guess we're wrapped up.
Well, thank you, Dr. Scoville, so much. That was so wonderful. I took lots of notes as usual. And, the questions about, what does success look like and having the action plan for yourself and just really awesome things to, again, put it back on us and think about how we're doing this because we can't do it if we can't coach our staff the right way and all those things. So thank you so much for your presentation. We really appreciate you being here twice for our last year too. So thank you.
Yeah, this one went a little smoother because I didn't have to rush in at the last minute, and I apologize to all of you who were on that last week. That was my own fault for screwing up my schedule.
Hey, it's okay, right? This is the right person. This is the right group of people to talk to, right? Because we all have to be super flexible and have to move and shift, and it's okay. So no worries, no worries. But
right,
again,
well,
thank you so much. Love that you were here. For those of us on the call right now, we have a break until about 10:55. At 10:55, we will hear. It's our third and final session of this series. If you build it, they will come with Corey Zalowski. I hope I'm saying your last name right. But she will be here to talk a little bit more about all the things that she has done in her program, and she's got lots of experience, and we're really excited to have her talk a little bit more about what she's done and give us some tips and tricks. So not hearing anything else, we will be on break until 10:55. Thank you so much for being here. We'll see you in a little bit.